a 15-year-old girl in Michigan was incarcerated during the coronavirus pandemic after a judge ruled that not completing her schoolwork violated her probation. Why are young Black girls criminalized for offenses that white girls don't, even see on their public school records? Jamia Wilson is here with us to discuss. Jamia is the executive director and publisher of Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former Women Action and Media executive director. She is the author of Big Ideas for Young Thinkers, Young, Gifted, and Black, and Step into Your Power, among other books. Jamia, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
I don't think most people have even heard about that recent report of the young Black girl, getting arrested for violating her probation. What was your reaction when you saw that story?
It broke my heart. And so I had this reaction of heartbreak and outrage that we still have this situation where this so-called zero tolerance discipline standard is set up to criminalize and demonize Black children, and Black girls are often left out of the conversation around this as well, in terms of the fact that we still see through the data and through the numbers that Black girls are facing the same systemic disparities that all Black children face, and Black boys specifically, but are often left out of the conversation around how excessive force is used, excessive punitive punishment for teenage rebellion that you see for children of all races, and which is normal, and the implicit bias and stereotyping and other cultural factors play a role. And yet the pain and also the exclusion and alienation that Black girl children specifically experience is often normalized or undermined in our conversation. And there's a numbness that we have to it as an overall culture because it has been normalized. And there's a lot of historic factors and systemic inequities that have led to that. But I just came into it with outrage, and it reminded me of my own experiences as a young person, getting in trouble for either defending myself or for speaking out about the indignities that I face. So I'm really concerned about the criminalization of children specifically, and it's something that needs to stop, and we need to talk more about it.
Jamia, I've noticed recently that the coverage of young Black women being brutalized by police. I saw, I can't remember how long it was ago, being pulled hair out of their seats in their school, an enormous 180-pound police officer kneeling on the back of a 14-year-old. I think that people were even more, they were somehow, when you do that to boys, it doesn't seem somehow mentally, I don't know how this happens to people, it doesn't seem as eye-catchy or horrifying as when you do it to girls. Do you think the fact that repeated violence against young girls and women shown on TV, not that we want this to happen, but would have the kind of effect of raising outrage among, the general populace of the United States?
What I think is so sad about how we're kind of seeing that play out in this moment is that although we have the story of Breonna Taylor being killed in her home, shot in the middle of the night, and yet still left out of so many conversations, still not having demands for justice being as rigorous or as loud across the world about her murder, leads me to think that because of the compound effects of racism and misogyny, that we would still have this prevalent cultural problem. Because the reality is that young women and girls are harshly affected by this criminalization as much as men. And yet most people don't know that Black girls are more than 6 times more likely to be suspended from school as white girls. And so I think that this undercurrent of seeing how African-American young women and girls are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated as our younger white counterparts leads to this idea that our conversations, the conversations about our lives and our experiences are ignored. And at best, if they're not ignored, are thought of as an afterthought or an anomaly. And so I think that having conversations about making this more visible, but also talking about why this suffering is so normalized, why these conversations are being ignored, are extremely important, because we're just so used to dismissing, undermining, and making invisible the stories of violence against Black girls and young women and trans people of color. And I think that one of the cases that really still stays in my bones, although it happened several years ago, is Daniel Holtzclaw, who was a police officer who was assigned an all-white jury for sexually assaulting 13 Black women, including younger women as well, and women of all ages. And just thinking about how that was allowed to happen, how that was made invisible for so long, and how it was allowed to persist, leads back into this conversation of how the ignoring is also a part of the violence, how the silence is also a part of the violence.
Do you think that this sickness of thought just leads directly back to the legacy of slavery?
Oh, absolutely. I think, when I think about Harriet Tubman, when I think of Sojourner Truth, when I think of Black women and girls saying, "Ain't I a woman?" having to make that declaration, right? Every time I think about it, I feel it in my blood and bone, that we're still asking that question. And I think that when you think about how the Black women's reproductive systems were undermined and used as a part of a capitalist tool to build a country on Black backs and brown backs, we can go directly there. And when we think about law enforcement and how we've created these punitive standards, it also makes a lot of sense if we understand how law enforcement as we know it today was formed out of the slave catching patrols in history as well. So all of that really needs to be interrogated. The vigilante violence that we see now, that vigilante violence is connected to the vigilante violence that we saw pre and after Reconstruction and the formation of terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And so all of it really needs to be interrogated. And also we need to talk about what it would mean to center the experiences of Black young women and girls and trans folks, to talk about why we have a lack of coverage and why we need more conversations like the one we're having right now to help put a stop to this.
The recent movement for Black rights that's been happening in the wake of the George Floyd killing has been calling for the defunding of police. And one of the major areas where they want, is being called to pull funds from is police in the schools. Could you talk about the effect of having, instead of police in our schools, social workers and counselors?
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. I think about how much work we need to do to reframe how people understand what defund the police actually means, because so many people don't understand that defunding means that we would use those funds to invest in communities to stop the root causes of violence in general, the root causes of the social inequities that lead people to have to fight for the basic needs that we all should have access to. And I think that it's extremely important for us to talk about what would it look like if we treated trauma through support, if we treated mental health issues compassionately and through rehabilitation instead of criminalization and punitive measures, if we had more restorative ways to bring people to justice through learning and healing.
How about really just even in the schools, like how about just having a general idea of what is a normal age appropriate stage that children of all races and colors should be going through?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think too, when we think about how we teach our young people about how we manage conflict, how we engage with each other as human beings, right? That is a prime time for where we form our self-awareness and our awareness of community. So I would love to see more of those funds being spent on social emotional learning. So right now we have foundations that spend money investing in communities on social emotional learning practices. And what And I think it's important for that to happen in the philanthropy sector. But what outrages me about that is that that's something our government should actually be doing by investing in that, because there are other nations who have shown what it means to invest in social emotional learning and empathy early on in a young person's life, and how that translates into young people's well-being and community well-being over time. And I think that it's extremely important, because we are operating as if collaboration and community and interdependence is not possible. And we know that actually that is possible. And there are communities that operate on different systems and operated long before colonialism and capitalism came here, who were able to show how reciprocity, interdependence, social emotional learning, and our new language can lead to thriving and robust, healthier societies. And I would like a return to an investment on that, a focus on that.
You have much deep wisdom, and that is one of the reasons we love having you on the program. And some of that you have put into books specifically for children and young people and young women. Do you have any advice for young Black girls like Grace who are faced with the system that tells them, you know, the punishment for slipping up is incarceration?
Ooh, you know, one of the reasons I write children's books, and one of the reasons that I publish books and publish other people's books through the feminist press, is so that young people can grow up recognizing themselves in books. I did not grow up during a time when I could recognize myself in very many books, or where I liked the reflection of how my community was being portrayed in the media. And so what I want to encourage young people to do is to say, through my books and through this conversation, every book I write is a love letter to say, you are enough. You are not the problem. The society that stigmatizes, criminalizes, and discriminates against you is the problem. We have your back and we'll follow your leadership to fix it. And I also want to encourage young people to get involved and get involved in their communities, that their voices do matter. That's why I love the Girls for Gender Equity, Every Black Girl Matters campaign that they started years ago. It was a letter writing campaign, and it affirmed Black girlhood, the right to safety and freedom and dignity. And I want to say that I'm writing a love letter to you in every one of my books, and that I will try as an older ally now to demand more accountability and to do my part in that, and to do that for them and us. So I think it's important too. I see that the ACLU has some really amazing projects around their teen activism projects and organizations like Girls for Gender Equity. And I want to also encourage those of us who are older to listen to young folks and support their leadership through organizations like that as well, and their own organizations that they've started.
What can people who are, you've encouraged a number of good ideas for us oldies, and what can people who are not Black of any age do to stop this process of criminalizing young Black girls?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to support the work of organizations who are trying to transform the conditions in our country and around the world to help defend, protect, and expand the safety and freedom of Black girls and Black trans people, because we understand that when those who are most marginalized have all the conditions and access that they need to be free, that helps all of us. That serves all of us. When all Black lives matter, all lives will matter. And that's a common misunderstanding. So what I want to share with folks is to say, if you have money that you can contribute, support organizations like Black Women's Blueprint, Girls for Gender Equity, A Long Walk Home, support organizations led by Black women and girls. And if you have marching power, support the actions that they organize, volunteer. And if you have a voice that you can share, raise your voice and speak to other people about these issues, help center the voices. And so that might even mean sharing the mic by handing your Instagram over to someone who your community needs to hear from, who is more marginalized than yourself. There's so many ways that we can take responsibility and also demand accountability. And lastly, I would say one that's really on my mind right now is to speak to lawmakers and policymakers who need to make change, lobby, sign petitions, demand accountability. Thinking about Breonna Taylor right now, all of us can make calls and write letters right now to demand justice. And that's what we should also do in the case of Grace, et cetera, to make our voices heard and to say to those who are in power, We will not take this. This is an affront to all of us. Their wounds are our wounds, and we will not stop until you hear us and transform things.
We're speaking to Jamia Wilson, Executive Director and Publisher of Feminist Press at the City University of New York, and the former Women Action and the Media Executive Director. She's the author of Big Ideas for Young Thinkers, Young, Gifted, and Black, and Step Into Your Power, a good gift for any young Black girl. And I loved it as an adult, so especially the last one. Thank you so much for being on the program, Jimmy. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
We look forward to having you again, and stay well.
Can't wait. You too.
You're watching ACT.TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to follow us on, YouTube, but you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We're all over, and can be found on the internets wherever Julianna Forlano can be found, like Twitter. I have a YouTube page myself, but pretty much I just do the work here. Thanks everyone for watching. That's the end of our show on Facebook. I'm going to be on Twitch for another little while. So if you want to come over and participate in the conversation over there, we are twitch.tv/act.tv. Otherwise, we will be back tomorrow with some other amazing interviews on tomorrow's program. Oh, who's coming up on tomorrow's program? I don't know. Wait a minute. Someone is coming up on tomorrow's program. Oh, I've lost track. Well, it's okay. We always have the great people, so just come back and it'll be a surprise. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.